Hi again. Let's talk about JavaScript, and we'll continue with our shopping cart example here. And what I'd like to focus on for this talk is this little block in here, display cart, okay? And specifically, I want to talk about, building the string that we output to the shopping cart, okay? So let's go over this function. So we got display cart. And the first thing that it does is it gets the cart array from the list cart function. And then we define a variable called output, and it's defined as an empty string. So this is, a string could be any number of characters, right? And this is, 0 characters, right? And then we've got this for loop here that loops through every item in the cart array, okay, one at a time. And then what we're doing is we're using the plus equal sign here to append, and that means add to the end of. So, and then, we're creating a string of characters here. This is actually built from some values in some of the variables, but, they all, it's all getting converted into a string, and all those characters are being added to this output variable here. And then at the end, after we loop a few times, and every time through the loop we add something new to output, to the end of output. And then at the end here, when it's all over, we write the entire contents of output into this, using HTML into the show cart div. Okay, so that looks a little complicated. Let's kind of break it down. So let's imagine, you had a variable here called, some text. Okay, and I set it equal to, empty. And then if I said, console log some text, right? Then, if I looked at the output window here, let me actually move this up a little ways so we can see both windows together here. Yeah, there we go. There's some text right there, and the console message, and then here we've got our console, right? So I'll refresh the page here, and then you can see there's nothing, right? Because it put the empty string there. And then what if I did this? What if I said, let's, put in some letter A's, right? So now I'll save that and I'll refresh, and then I see the letter A's, right? Well, this is okay, if we know what we want to write to the output window. But a lot of times, like with this show cart thing, we need to build the string that we want to write into the console. We need to build it, right? We don't know what it is. We're getting it from somewhere else, and then we need to put it together, right? So maybe we want to write something like this. We want to say some text plus equals. This means append, right? So let's add some characters here. So I'll add some characters here. Maybe, I started off with some arrows like that, and then I want to add, the letters A, right? So we'll put them all together, and then now, I get the arrows and the A's, right? So this plus equals, you can see is adding these guys to the end of what we have here, right? Okay, so, that's all well and good, but, a lot of times you might want to write some HTML in the page. So what if what if this was like an H1, and then we want to write, AAA, and then maybe later on we want to write, the closing H1, something like that. Then we could, we could use the plus equal sign like this, right? And then down here, we'll actually have some valid HTML, right? Like H1, some text, closing H1, right? And then we could write that into the content of the page over here, right? So let's do a little more, right? So let's imagine, this message right here is actually coming from somewhere else. Like we have a, var called message, right? And it could be anything. Like, hello world or something, right? And then, we don't want to write AAA here. We want to write message. Okay, so we'll put message there, right? And then now when I refresh down here, you can see it says, H1 hello world. and then the closing H1, right? So, essentially we started some text here, we added the message to the end, and then we added the closing H1 to the end, and then we wrote all of it into the console, right? Let's do a little more with that, right? So, we could rewrite this too. Maybe we want to rewrite this all in one line, right? So maybe, in order for us to put the message on here, we could say, H1 plus the message, right? So we could combine that onto one line like this, and then down here we could add, the closing H1 on the end, right? And that would, produce the same results here. It looks exactly the same. And you could do it again here like this. So if you want to do all this in one line, we could write it like that, right? So sort of the formula here is something like this. Like, if you have a var, and we said, another text, we might have like a paragraph here, a closing paragraph, and then if we decided we wanted to take this message and put it in the middle, we can't just put the word message in there, because then that'll print out the text. Let's actually print this one also, right? Right, so like this will print, some text and another text here. And if I write the word message in there in the string, then it's just going to say message here, right? Okay. So if I want to put the variable here, what I need to do is close the string with the quotation mark, and then close this other string that's going to be created, right? So if I put a quote in here, I'm essentially ending the first string, and then the second string is missing its beginning quote, so we'll have to put one here. And then in the middle, we can, using the plus signs, we can combine these two strings on either end with, some, variable or other value, right? Okay, and this is what's going on here. Okay, and you could rewrite this. We could separate it onto a couple lines, right? Let's just test this one just to make sure that it's working, right? So, oh look, there's the paragraph with hello world, right? So this is exactly what's happening here. This is a little more complicated than just the message we have, because we've got an array, and then we're getting the the item at this index, and then it's an object, so we're asking for the property of that object. But essentially, this is our value, and then we're connecting it with the string, or concatenating, they call it, right? So we're connecting it here, and then we need to connect it with the next string here. And I wanted to put a space in between the two, so the space is a character, right? It's just like any of the letters or numbers. And so in order to insert that, I need to put a space in there with two quotation marks, right, around it. Okay, and if you like this, then you could do it all on one line. Sometimes these lines get really long like that, so you could also break this into multiple lines. You're allowed to do this in JavaScript too. If you put the plus sign here, you can put a line return in between, and I think it's okay with that, right? Like, I didn't get an error there, and it still seems to be displaying, right? So I think if you have the plus sign at the end of the line, or if you put the plus sign at the beginning of the line, then you're okay. If you're connecting this a bunch of things together with a string, right? So you could write it like that if you want. One last thing too, I'm using the plus equal here because I want to, with each loop, I want to add another one of these to the end of output, right? So that I need the plus equal here, because if I just do the equal, it'll replace the last one with, the new list item, right? So if I do it this way without the plus sign, my output that I'm seeing here will just show the last item, shoe, right? So that doesn't work, because, essentially, I'm looping here, 7 times or how many times, and as I do, I'm overwriting, right? But if I put the plus here, right, then that means, add to or combine or append, right? So that means like, add this on the end of what's already there, okay? So anyway, so hopefully that's helpful and maybe enlightens everyone to how this is working. Let me actually add one more thing. I define this variable here outside of the loop. So it's important, that we don't define it here, because putting it here would mean that the beginning of each loop, like each time we loop, so if we're looping 7 times, the beginning of each of those 7 times we would be erasing output and setting it to no characters, right? So, it's important that we define this guy outside here, right, like that, right? So now, we're defining it here before we begin the loop, and then we're going to run the loop, for X number of times, and then add to or append to this variable each loop until we're done. And then when we're done, we're going to write the total, like here's output here, and then the total sum of all of the strings that we've added together are going to go into the show cart ID, okay? So hopefully maybe that enlightens everybody to a little bit as to how this function is working, right? And then we'll continue to go over some of these other features and maybe add some more features to the cart in some future videos. So hopefully that's interesting. Thanks for watching.